look, at the end of the day, this is what's fun about syndication in general, especially for me. You can do whatever you want, honestly. Very, very few things you cannot do, right? Like paying people to raise money and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're disclosing, that's the name of the game, disclosure. If you disclose, you can structure your deal however you want. You want to do a 1-year fund, a 100-year fund, just put it, as long as we're disclosing and the investors go in open-eyed, then do whatever you want.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of The Reports. Today, we are back in the studio here in downtown San Diego. We got a little sunshine outside, and we got our Beers and Deals meetup tonight. First meetup of the year, so super excited about that. But I got a special guest who helps keep real estate investors out of trouble, asset protection, syndication. I got my man, Mauricio Rauld. Mauricio, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. This is a sweet setup, my friend.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And dude, we were talking before we jumped in here. You live right up the street in San Clemente. That's where I grew up.
Yeah, it's like an hour north, just up the freeway. Yeah, it's not bad at all.
Yeah, not too far. And you're talking about setting up your own podcast studio here soon.
Yeah, we've been doing it's time to scale up, dude. I've been doing the podcast via Zoom. I think that's how most people start, but I'm doing it for 2 years now. So it's time. I think it's time to upgrade. It's time to bring in the thunder. It's time to come up with a legit set like you do. And I think it's time to bump it up.
Yeah, man. I totally think you should go all in and make it happen. Let me know what I could do to help, man.
Dude, you're going to be my first guest when I...
I'll be happy to. And we connected through Bethany LaFlam.
Yeah.
Shout out Bethany. Bethany is our SEC counsel. We're actually using her for a deal that we're buying here, closing in about 3.5 weeks up in Northern California. But we connected through Bethany, and man, Bethany's great.
She's been my partner for like 5 years now. She's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. I stay out of the way. I let her do all the stuff, and I try and stay out of her way. She's so amazing.
You guys work with all the big real estate names in the space.
Yeah.
I'm not going to throw out specific names, but you guys work with a lot of the bigger names in the space. And how did you guys meet? I'm just curious.
Bethany and I? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was a solopreneur for a long time, and I had a health scare, 2018 or something. I had a surgery that got botched, and I was literally out for 6 months, like no revenue, one man, single point failure, right? Mm-hmm. So after I got out of that, I made a commitment that I was going to go build something that was self-sustaining, that had a team around it, so that if ever happened again, that I wouldn't happen. And it's funny, I was working with two other lawyers, and then Bethany was kind of my sort of just helping me out on a contract basis. And I don't know why it took me a year to realize that I had such an amazing talent right under my nose. And, these other attorneys were like floundering, and it took me a while to figure it out. But then eventually I decided, Bethany's the one, started working together. And then, I made her partner like 2 years in. She's that good.
Yeah.
She's that good. Yeah.
I love that. Love working with you guys so far. It's been great. So I guess what I want to start with, because there's a lot to dig in here, asset protection, syndication. But first things first, when a real estate investor goes out there, they're talking about getting their first deal. Yeah. How should they really structure their LLCs to get and maximize their protection from a liability standpoint?
Yeah, so if you're a real estate investor, there's really 2 things you've got to be concerned about, right? So the first one is you want to make sure you're protecting yourself from the asset itself. So let's like real estate. That's what most people think of. So if something happens to the property, a tenant slips and falls, or there's some boiler blows up or whatever, there's an injury, we want to make sure we're structuring it so that the liability is limited to, doesn't get to you, right? So that's one angle that I think most people think about. The other angle is what happens if something happens to you unrelated to the property? So you get into a car accident or a business dispute. Now there's a judgment against Rich. I want to make sure that they can't get to your assets. Because you're Rich, you and everybody else, we're like liability producing machines. We're walking around, driving cars, getting into contracts, doing all that stuff. So at a minimum, you want to be separating the ownership, right? You don't want to be a direct owner of the asset, because the asset's a dangerous place. So for real estate investors, the first step is to create a limited liability company, like an LLC, to actually own the property, right? LLC in and of itself will most likely protect you from those inside attacks. Again, if a tenant slips and falls and they want to sue, they're going to sue the owner. The owner's responsible. So the owner's the LLC now. So you should be protected in that scenario because it's a limited liability company. But the problem is not all LLCs will protect you if you get into trouble unrelated to the asset. So if you get into a car accident, we're in California, this is a great example. So you get into a car accident, I get a judgment against you personally, and I say, I want to start collecting on your assets. You say, well, I don't own the asset, I own an LLC. It's pretty easy for me here in California to go get a judge to basically tell the judge, hey, hand me over the ownership of the LLC to me because Rich owes me $1 million and this LLC owns a bunch of assets. So I want that LLC. So that's why we have to kind of do a couple of extra steps in those scenarios.
Multiple layers of protection.
Multiple layers. So you want to have what we call a holding company, really. So instead of owning the LLC, you want a holding company. And those are companies that don't do any business. They're there just to hold assets. And those are the ones that you want to set up in states that you are familiar with: Nevada, Wyoming, Delaware. Texas is now a new one. Texas is just, as of September 1st, Texas ran and passed a new law in their statutes extending, we'll talk about charging order in a second, but extending protections to single member LLCs. And a lot of real estate investors are there by themselves, or husband and wives, which are considered single. So Texas did the same thing Nevada and Delaware and Wyoming did, which they amended their statutes so that even if you're a single member LLC, you get the same protection as multi-members. And
so Texas is a non-piercing state, is that right?
It's the other way. It's a state that extends charging order to single members. That's really the key. So a lot of folks are just husband and wives, which consider single. And so if you're a resident of Texas, right now I would say there's no reason to go set up something in Nevada or Wyoming. I would just set up in Texas because you get the same protection.
So when we buy a lot of these deals, we usually rely on our counsel to form these entities. And so a lot of our East Coast counsels that we've used, they set up these Delaware for us. More the West Coast ones tend to use the Wyoming. Is there any rhyme or reason or benefits of using one of those four over the other three?
The Delaware is interesting. Some of the lenders, especially multifamily, they insist on Delaware. Delaware has really robust corporate laws and business law. They actually have a separate court system just to deal with business. So lenders tend to like, if there's a dispute, the lender wants to be dealing in Delaware. So a lot of times we may want to set up, let's say you're buying a property in Arizona. We just want to set up an Arizona LLC to own the property. They want a Delaware LLC they want to lend to a Delaware LLC. So we end up having a Delaware LLC own the Arizona LLC to own the stuff. So, and then Wyoming's just easier. It's cheaper. It's, it's got an anonymity. Like, I love Wyoming because even the state of Wyoming has no clue who you are. Like, you could walk into the Secretary of State and demand to see paperwork, and they don't even have that information themselves. And so to me, if you're into privacy, which I am, and a lot of other clients are, I love Wyoming for that reason.
So there's a big LLC change here in 2024 that everyone's talking about. What exactly is it, and what does it mean?
It's a nightmare is what it is. It's called, I assume you're talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, right?
Yes.
So according to the government, in order to protect us from, money laundering and tax evasions and nefarious activity and all that kind of stuff, they want to know now, the U.S. government wants to know who the ultimate owners are of all of these LLCs. So they don't care that you're setting up a holding company and an LLC and a trust and this and the other. They want to know who owns 25% of this company or more, and they want to know the individual. And they want to know your name, they want to know your home address, they want to know your date of birth, and they want to know your driver's license or passport number, and they want a copy of your passport or driver's license. And so this is all starting January 1st, 2024. So any entities that you form this year, you have 90 days to file this information with the government under what's called FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. You got 90 days to do that. And if you don't, the penalties are pretty severe. It's $500 a day per day per violation. And if you get to the criminal side, it's $10,000 a day and 2 years in prison.
Wow.
They're not messing around.
And what if you form these entities in 2023 or sooner?
So these apply to any entities you've ever filed, that you've actually filed with the Secretary of State. So if you set something up 20 years ago because you bought a rental property, then you're going to have a year. You have 1 year from the date from today. So you have until the end of 2024 to do that. So you got a little bit more time if you got prior entities. But I literally have clients. I have a particular client who has over 100 LLCs.
Yeah, I believe it.
So that's a lot of freaking compliance, and trying to track down all that information gets pretty pricey. So we've actually made a decision not to do any of these anymore. It's just too, because here's the thing that really sucks for us is that the person or the company that files, so we filed our LLCs for our clients, we're on the hook too if we don't do it right. Right. And so, if we set up an LLC and then, Rich, you decide that you don't want to give me your home address for whatever reason, or you give me the wrong address, or you don't want to do whatever, then we're on the hook too for the penalties. And so there's a really high liability now for the applicant who's actually, whether it's us, whether it's LegalZoom, whether it's any of these entities. And so we just decided to just outsource that now. And we have another company that's just going to handle all the filings, all the Corporate Transparency Act filings. And we're just like, we're out.
Yeah, we got to figure something out because we use, I want to say 3 different corporate filing companies, third-party companies. Corporate Direct is one of them. Prime Corporate Services is another one. And then we've had various, SEC attorneys form other ones. So I need to figure out, okay, who's going to be doing all the managing? I kind of want it under one person. So then it's like one point of contact, one director, and anything that we need to be ran up we just go through that person or that company. So I need to figure out what that's going to look like. I do like Prime Corporate Services. They have like a good affiliate program. So I'm thinking maybe we'll roll with them.
Yeah. No, I mean, anybody but us. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
we want no part of it.
And for the listeners out there, if you are interested in, creating an LLC and having someone do it for you, do all the managing, the paperwork, all that sort of stuff, making it hands off for you, primecorporateservices.com/Rich Summers to book a free call, and they give you a nice little discount there. But that said, so a lot of changes happening this year with all that sort of stuff. Any other major changes in the asset protection front this year, 2024?
Yeah, the only other one was Texas. I mean, Texas came out with this new law that extended charging order protection. And charging order, we kind of skipped over, but it's such an important concept. I want to make sure people get it. So what you want is in an asset protection law is you want to limit the person who's trying to sue you to a charging order, because a charging order just gives them the right to receive distributions, doesn't give them ownership or control. So we want charging order. And for single members, charging order, the whole point, by the way, about charging order, Rich, is like, let's say you and I are in business together, right? And then you get into some car accident. We don't want the creditors to take over your share of the company, because now I'm stuck with some creditor doing business. So that makes no sense. And the creditor doesn't want to run a business, they want to sell it. So that's the whole idea behind a charging order, which doesn't really make sense if it's just you, one person. But these states have gone out and extended this to single members or husband and wife. So you want to be in those states that have that charging order protection as the exclusive remedy. And Texas now has come out September 1st. So that's the other big one on the asset protection world.
Yep. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you got your holding or your parent LLC in one of those states that we just mentioned.
Yep.
And above that, you could also have a living trust.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the benefits of having a living trust.
I think every single person on this earth should have a living trust but to be careful, a living trust has no asset protection value whatsoever. It's not an asset protection play, but it's an estate planning tool, right? And what it does is it avoids probate. And probate is this really convoluted process that when you die, you basically have to go through a governmental process, the court systems, to get all your assets distributed. And so that takes time. It takes 6 months, a year, and if you've got multiple properties, it can take multiple years. It costs money that you end up paying, your estate ends up paying, and it's public, so everybody knows your business. And so if you want to be able to transfer your assets, without that hassle and be it a little bit more smoothly, you want a living trust. That's the tool you want to use to pass your assets to your heirs. The biggest mistake I see, though, is people think that, hey, the living trust also has some asset protection benefit. And so a lot of times they'll just have an asset like a piece of property owned by a living trust, and they think, oh, I'm protected. And same thing with a land trust, by the way. Land trust is very similar to a living trust. It's a revocable trust, which means it has no asset protection value. You can add components to it to make it protected, but in and of itself, it's not. And so, but it's a great tool. Every time I talk to one of my clients and we look at an entity structure, I always ask them, do you have a living trust? And if not, I'm not an estate planning attorney, but I refer them right away to somebody who can set one up.
If you love real estate investing, passive income, and tax benefits, but don't have the time, my company, Summers Capital, is buying boutique hotels right now. We source the deals, we renovate the properties, and we even handle all the day-to-day management, making it truly hands-off for our investors. If you want to learn more to see if we can help you, visit summerscapital.com/invest to book a call with our team. Again, that's summerscapital.com/invest. Now back to the show. What makes someone a good candidate to where you're like, you should definitely have a trust? Is it if you have kids? Or even if you don't have kids, you should definitely have one.
For sure. I'm actually working on a book, and one of the chapters on my book is don't let the government tell you what to do with your kids. Because essentially that's so the thing about the trust is that, and it's not just more about a will, right? Because the trust, there's a will and a trust. If you don't have a trust or a will, you have one. You just don't know about it. It's in the statute. It's in the law, right? So the law will dictate where your properties go, who's going to take care of your kids, right? So if you have kids, for sure you want to have a trust. But even if you don't, I think they're so inexpensive these days. I mean, you can get a trust set for a couple grand or something. There's really no reason not to do it.
What's the difference between a trust and a will?
A will is actually sort of the instructional document that says, here's everything I own, and I want this to go to Rich, I want this to go to Bethany, I want this to go to Zing. And then the trust is the entity structure that bypasses the probate. So the will and the trust go hand in hand.
Okay. I know a lot of our investors invest in our fund through a revocable trust. What is the difference between a revocable and irrevocable?
So a revocable trust is like a living trust or a land trust. That means you can change it. It's revocable. You can change it at any time. You're the one that sets it up. And
you can change the assets.
You can change who the beneficiaries are.
Okay.
You can move assets in and out. You can do whatever you want. An irrevocable trust, which is the one that you really want for asset protection purposes, which is what an asset protection trust is irrevocable. So once you set it up, that's it. If you're not the beneficiary, you're not the trustee, whoever you assign, that's it. And because it has that feature, That's what gives it the asset protection value.
Got
But
it.
but an asset protection trust, I always think of these things as layers, right? So to me, it depends on where you are in your journey and how much assets you have and what kind of job you have. Not everybody needs an asset protection trust, right? My analogy is the clothing, right? Sometimes you can get away with a t-shirt. We're in California, it's a sunny day, t-shirt's fine. But sometimes it gets a little cooler in the evening, you want to have a little sweater on, right? And if it gets really cold, you put on a jacket. And if it's like a blizzard, my wife's from Chicago, it's a freaking Chicago blizzard, you're putting on a winter coat. It's the same thing with asset protection. You just have different layers depending on where you are in your journey. If you just started out and you have one rental property, right? That's worth $100,000 and you put, 10% down.
Yeah.
You don't need anything super fancy. You're not going to need an asset protection trust. You're not going to need any of these fancy equity stripping strategies. You probably just need arguably you may just need an insurance policy, although I always like the LLCs, but an insurance policy and an LLC is probably all you need at that point.
Yeah, I get people all the time like reaching out and they're looking to buy their first real estate deal and they want to make sure their asset protection is all set up before they even start looking for their first deal. I'm like, guys, like you don't need to worry about all these different layers right now. Like just focus on finding that first deal. And then everything else will kind of fall into place, and you can always adjust stuff as you go.
I think if you're just starting out, like an insurance policy is always your first line of defense. I have a lot of issues with insurance policies. So, but then I think you just set up an LLC, honestly, because that'll at least protect you because you have unlimited exposure. So even if your property is only worth $5, but somebody gets hurt on your property and is a quadriplegic and there's a $5 million judgment, it doesn't matter. There's only $5 in equity. You're going to be on the hook for that whole $5 million. So get the insurance policy as your first line, get your LLC as a second line. Don't worry about the holding company and the trust and the management company and all that stuff. Worry about that once you start developing more.
I get a question. So whenever there's an issue or let's say a claim at a property, I had someone pass away at a 8-unit apartment building that I have out in Cincinnati. And this is probably a few months back. We're turning one of the units. It was vacant for like 2 weeks. A homeless guy broke into the unit, passed away. The property manager went to tour the unit with a prospective tenant, and I guess they're the dead body in there.
Wow.
And so the insurance claim, it was like $15,000 to just get everything cleaned up and all that sort of thing. But that's a minor claim in terms of a dollar value.
Yeah.
But especially for these bigger ones, at what point, like, is it always insurance that kicks in first?
Always.
If there's any sort of like liability or a lawsuit, and
always.
then after that, then it's going to fall back to the entities.
Yep. Insurance is your first line. I think of the entities as a backstop because insurance just has holes in it. You're underinsured. They just have a bunch of exclusions. It's one of my biggest beefs. I have a lot of people that I know that are making their monthly payments, their premium payments religiously, thinking they're protected. And then when something happens, they realize they're not, because an insurance policy is I have a hard time with insurance policies, right? And most people don't go hire an insurance attorney to review it for them. All these insurance policies have holes. So when you're in that situation where you're not covered, even though you thought you were, you want to have a backstop. And that's what really an LLC is meant to do, is a backstop to insurance.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about like an umbrella policy? Is that something that you recommend? Again,
yeah, insurance is different. Now, one of the things you got to be super careful about with umbrella policies, for example, is that those are usually for personal items. So if you have a rental property, is that considered a business, and is your umbrella policy covering that? Again, a lot of people are making their umbrella policies thinking they're covered, and they don't realize that because it's a rental business, it's not covered. So you're gonna have to get a business umbrella policy.
I hear folks out there sometimes say, "Oh, I have the real estate under my personal name, and I just have a good umbrella policy, and I'm good."
Yeah,
I don't like that. I don't need LLCs.
I don't agree with that at all because there's so many issues with an insurance property. I mean, there was a joke when I was at the law firm many, many years ago. I had a guy who just constantly had letters from insurance, just denying the claim, and then he always had to like threaten to sue them, and he'd eventually get it done. But insurance is a great tool. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't get it. It's 100% mandatory, I think, to get it. But just realize they have holes. And you at least need to be aware of those holes and either plug those holes with more insurance, or again, an LLC costs, I mean, Prime's such a great company. I mean, they charge like $5. They don't charge $5, but it's not that expensive to set one up.
Yeah. And some of the bigger claims that I've seen with a lot of our properties, I've noticed these insurance companies, it almost sounds like they have individuals on their payroll that like their sole job is to like figure ways out of
100%.
to pay out on these claims.
100%. And look, if it's a small thing, if it's $5,000 or $10,000, if it doesn't matter. Right? But if you get into a catastrophic claim and the insurance company's on the hook for $1 million,
that's a big amount.
They're not going to just write a check for $1 million. They're going to look through that policy. Here's a good tip for everyone listening, is that one of the easiest ways for an insurance company to get out of paying you is the application. People fill out the application without thinking too much, and they just put whatever info, even though they might be asking you for specific info. That's one way they can get you. Say, hey, you misrepresented the application. You didn't disclose this in the application, or we asked you for this information about all your hospital visits, and this is more for life insurance, but like
Right.
here's all your stuff. You didn't disclose to us ABC. That's one of the easiest places they can get to. So I'm always really
Diligent.
anal, for lack of as my legal term, about just making sure I'm filling out that application, because I don't want them to come back later and say, oh, on line 27, and we asked you this question and you weren't completely truthful, were you? You left something out. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about, syndication, raising money for real estate. A lot of folks out there that are building their portfolios, you really need, three things. You need deal development, so you need access to good deals, and you need capital development. You need access to funds and money. That's going to be both on the lending side, but also on the equity side. And then the third bucket really is you need operations. Who's going to manage these properties, right? And so, capital development's a big deal. A lot of these larger commercial deals are bought via syndication with multiple investors. And so, there's a lot of different SEC regulations out there to where, there's things that you can do, there's things you can't do. And then I would say there's a big gray area, right?
yes,
And so knowing that gray area and how close you can kind of come up to that line,
yes,
it's a delicate subject, because you might talk to one SEC counsel and they're going to say no. You talk to another SEC counsel and they say, hey, we do this all the time with our clients.
yes.
And so, I always err on the side of caution, right? Because at the end of the day, like all the stuff we're doing, it's great, but you start getting into legal trouble, then it's not great, right? And so things can change quickly. And so like, I just want to stay clean. But that said, what's a couple like hot topics right now with the syndication stuff that you like to advise your clients on?
Probably the biggest hot topic right now is people paying other people to bring money into their deals, right? That's been going on now for a long time. And Bethany and I actually were just talking about this yesterday, I think it was, where even though we're advising people not to do it, it's like everybody's doing it, so they want to go do it anyway. And I'm convinced that not too far from today, one person's going to get into trouble, and now the shit's going to hit the fan, and everybody's going to be in a world of hurt. Look, you cannot raise money for other people. You cannot get compensated for just bringing in the capital. And that's been going on for a while, where they're compensating people part of the deal, sort of part of the sponsorship group or part of the GP is what we call the general partnership, in exchange for them bringing in money. And you need a license for that. You literally need to be a licensed broker dealer in order to raise money for others. Now there's an exemption. So you have to get a license or you get an exemption, and people don't
what kind of
think
broker license is this?
it's a full out SEC. It's a FINRA, actually, technically a FINRA license, but you're a broker dealer. I mean, that's not something anybody's going to do. I mean, unless you're a professional. I mean, we looked into it many years ago for a client of mine, and it was like back then, like 15 years ago, it was cheaper to buy a broker dealer, and that was like 500 grand, 600 grand. But the compliance is, it's just over the top. So you're just not going to get it. Most syndicators don't realize that they're operating under one of the exemptions, right? And that's why, somebody like you, that you don't need to be a broker dealer, because you fit into this, what we call the issuer exemption. But you've got to be, I'll just give you the three real quick. Number one, you can't pay somebody transaction based, right? Hey, if you bring in $1 million, I'll give you X, right?
Yeah.
That's broker dealer all the time. You've got to be doing substantial duties. And that's the gray, like, what does that mean? But you got to be doing real work, right? That's why syndicators are doing real work. I mean, you're doing underwriting, due diligence, all this kind of stuff, asset management. So no transaction based, you've got to be doing substantial duties, and your primary role in the deal has to be those substantial duties. It can't be primarily raising capital. So if you can fit into those three, if you can show those three, then that's the exemption to the broker dealer. But I mean, the vast majority of people out there are literally just bringing in chunks of capital in exchange for percentage, and they're trying to afford, I'm doing substantial duties, but at the end of the day, they're not. And I think that's going to come back to burn a lot of people.
Yeah. I got a question for you. So we have a fund here at Summers Capital, and we just buy and operate our own stuff. I don't intend to raise money in our fund and go with other operators. That said, could we legally raise money in our fund and then put that money into other operators?
Yes, you can. It just opens you up to a whole new area of regulations, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. So in addition to that, that's what we typically call in our industry sort of a fund of funds,
Yep.
Or a feeder fund or what have you. And it's all good. But the subtle difference that a lot of people miss is that when you're buying a hotel, right? You're buying your hotel, you are creating an LLC, right? Your fund or your syndication to go buy real estate. You don't need a license to do that. You don't need a license to go buy real estate. But when you do a fund of funds, what are you doing? You're actually raising money and you're buying shares in somebody else's company, or LP units, right? Or LLC units, whatever. So now you're buying a security. So instead of buying real estate, which has no additional regulation, you're buying a security. So that then opens up all of the security types regulations, which aren't the end of the world, but you're technically called you become an investment advisor, so you got to worry about investment advisory rules. You still got to make sure you're not a broker dealer. There's an Investment Companies Act. It's just a bunch of more regulation.
Do you still have to be an active participant in that business?
No, that's by
You don't.
definition. You're not. No, you're
Okay.
not. No, so you are a passive investor. It's like you're buying stocks in Apple or Google or Microsoft. You're buying shares in somebody else's company
because you're investing through your fund and not through an individual.
Correct, because you're raising capital into your fund, and you said, hey, in my fund, I'm going to go buy a bunch of hotels and this, that, the other. But in addition to, I want to have the options. Hey, Mauricio's got a deal, and his deal is buying a hotel, so I want to invest in Mauricio's deal. But now you're just buying shares in my company, in my fund. Yeah. And so that you're just a limited partner at that point.
Yeah.
And because of that, you are buying securities, and that's why you have all these additional requirements.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know another one there's a big gray area on is the 506B versus the 506C. 506C, you can market and advertise, but you can only bring in accredited investors.
Yes.
Real quick, what is the threshold for accredited investors right now? Has it changed at all in the last couple of years?
It has changed in the last couple of years, but not significantly. But it's financial, primarily financial. So $1 million in net worth, excluding your primary residence, or you have earned $200,000 the last 2 years with a reasonable expectation of earning that or more this year. And if you're combining with your spouse, it's $300,000. And then the update that happened a couple of years ago is that if you have certain licenses, and we should definitely get to this at some point. So if you have special licenses, securities licenses. So if you're an investment advisor, you have a Series 7, Series 82, Series 65, and you're in good standing, you also are an accredited investor through that mechanism, which is a nice little loophole, actually, because you can become accredited now without having the financial requirements by taking one of those tests and becoming an investment advisor. And that way you'll become accredited. So that's something that LP should think about.
How long does that process take to get the test and qualify as
accredited? How quickly can you study and pass the exam? I mean, the hardest part, to be honest with you, which Bethany and I are working on a solution, is that you have to hang your license with an investment advisory firm, right? Which nobody's going to take you. So generally that means you've got to set up your own investment advisory firm, which isn't the end of the world.
Just create an LLC.
It's creating an LLC. You got to go through all the paperwork. There's a lot of firms out there that'll help you. You think you're probably spending $5, $6, $7 to have somebody help you set it up. But if you want to go that route, you just got to take a test and study for it. And it's not an easy test. It's a legit test. So, I don't think you can spend a weekend studying for it. You probably need a week or two to study. But they offer the exams all the time as long as you pass it. And
so I guess I'm curious, timeline-wise, if we had a non-accredited investor who was like, man, I really want to get in this opportunity, and it's 6 weeks away, would they be able to, is that enough time, you think?
It can, 6 weeks for sure. Yeah, for sure. Especially because the hardest part is going to be the having the firm, and that's what we're working on. So we're working on having our own firm that you can then just hang your license with our firm. Yeah. And pay us $100 a month or whatever. And so it'll be much easier. So when that happens, all you need to do is register for an exam and pass it. Take it and then pass it. Yeah, that changes things. So anyway, so you get the 506C where you can market and advertise, but you can only bring in accredited investors, and then you have the 506B. Where you can bring in up to 35 non-accredited investors. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot market and advertise. And the gray area is you need to have a pre-existing relationship with all the investors that come in. Now, what exactly defines pre-existing relationship under the SEC? So the SEC has a lot of gray areas. I would say that's not one of them. It's actually one of the few areas that they've given us really specific guidance. So just for the audience, so we don't leave them behind, when you're doing syndication, you have to either register your syndication with the SEC, find an exemption, or it's illegal. Those are my three things. So we don't want to register. We don't want to do anything illegal because registering is like going public. It's like an IPO, right? Yeah. So we're always looking for an exemption. And you just mentioned the two most popular exemptions, 506B and 506C. Hands down, 95% of everybody uses one of those two exemptions. In order to do a 506B, you cannot advertise or generally solicit, to your point. And so generally you have to have what's called a pre-existing substantive relationship with your prospect. And the SEC has come up with like 8 steps that if you follow these 8 steps, you're going to be in pretty good shape. The main ones is you want to have some kind of a questionnaire that you're presenting to your investors, and not just a, hey, what's your name, address, and what's your favorite color? It's one that's kind of akin when you're opening up a brokerage account and you're doing options, or hey, what are your financial goals? What's your level of experience? It's like some legit question. So get them to sign a questionnaire, fill out a questionnaire, and then get on the phone with them or meet with them, like either coffee, Zoom, call, maybe a couple, and get to know them. What the SEC wants is they want you to figure out whether that prospect is sophisticated. Do they have enough knowledge and expertise in business and financial matters to figure out the risks and the merits of your deal? And then the SEC wants the investor to ask you a bunch of questions like, hey, what's your philosophy? What are you investing in? They want to foster that relationship. There's all this misnomer out there that there's a 3-touch rule or a 30-day waiting or all that
That's
stuff.
the gray area I'm talking about. Everyone has a different
The
interpretation.
SEC has said that's a bunch of, literally the SEC has come out. There's a no action letter called Citizen VC. And they said that's a bunch of nonsense. We just want to make sure that it's the quality of the interactions between you and your prospect. So getting the questionnaire, getting on a phone call, walking through that stuff, having offline communications, emails, all that stuff, encouraging them to look at your website. There's a bunch of other things that you can do. The most important part of all that is just to document it. You've got to document that process because 5 years from now, if there's an issue and the SEC is breathing down your neck and you're like, hey, Rich, I see Mauricio's one. How did you meet Mauricio? You're not going to remember. So you want to have a file, a digital file, but a file of all those emails, phone calls, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's definitely in my mind, there's a lot of gray area for sure when the SEC. And to that point, I would just say it's and you brought it up earlier. It's just like when you're an investor. Some investors are conservative, some investors, and they want to invest in treasury bills. And then there's other investors that are like really aggressive and they want to invest in venture capital funds. And you're going to fit somewhere between. It's the same thing with the SEC. How aggressive? Because there are some things I think when it comes to like social media posting, for example, is that considered advertising or what kind of post? And or when your website is another thing, like what can you and can you not put on your website? And so then the question becomes, well, how aggressive are you? Are you conservative? Because if you're conservative, you definitely should not do that. If you're more aggressive and you're willing to kind of push the envelope and get closer to that gray area, but a lot of it is gray. But I don't think the pre-existing substantive relationship is gray because the SEC came out with those eight steps. It's basically told us what we can do.
Yeah. I didn't realize until earlier last year that if you got a fund or if you're doing a single asset syndication, that you can actually start off as a 506B and then switch to a 506C, which would allow you to market and advertise and maybe get that last chunk in. So in order to do that, what are the steps required to stay legal if you're going to switch it from a 506B to a C?
Yeah. So the main thing is you want to, while you're doing a B and while you're doing a C, you want to make sure you're fully complying with those rules, right? So with a B, again, no advertising, no solicitation. You can take a limited number of non-accredited, not too many, 35, unlimited raise or whatever. And then when you're doing the C, you want to make sure you're complying with that, meaning you can advertise, but only accredited investors come in the door. And you've got a responsibility to verify. You got to take reasonable steps to verify. But the main thing for us is you're complying with the B, and then at some point you make the decision that you're going to pivot. And you want to document that. That's probably the most important part. I like to do a written consent or a corporate resolution, and then it's timestamped somewhere. So either it's a DocuSign or a DocuSign or a notary or whatever. So there's no argument that So you just say, hey, today is whatever, January 10th, and today we're terminating our B and we're moving on to C. And from this point forward, we comply fully with C. There's some other best practices we like to do. So we like to have separate classes. So there's no debate. Like when you're doing
when you say separate classes, what do you mean?
Separate classes of membership units are for the investor. So if you're a Class A member or a Class B, so when you're doing the 506B, I like to issue Class A members. So there's just it's really more when you're advertising. So when you start advertising on your C, I like to sell the B shares because then there's no confusion. Like this is clearly part of my 506C offering. It's not part of my 506B.
Gotcha. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's why it's and again, that's nowhere in the statute or anything. It's just sort of a best practice. But I think the for sure you want to terminate it. And when you terminated it, I mean terminating, like you're pivoting. There's no more documents straddling in. There's no, I forgot, one more check coming in tomorrow. Like literally you are done. You're not accepting any more monies under the 506B. And then moving forward, you move to the 506C. And there are slightly different, we update the documents and some provisions in the PPM that we add, and your business plan changes a little bit. So there's some tweaks that we do there.
This was our first fund. We opened it last year, and I got to be honest, we're about to add our 4th property to the fund, and it's been great. Like just from a reporting standpoint to investors, it's like one set of reporting that goes out, one set of distributions. Like it's just a lot easier from an operations standpoint. But also when we go pick up another property, it's like all the org chart, all that stuff's pretty much done. We can use the same subscription agreement, the same PPM. And from like a workload standpoint, paperwork standpoint up to closing, it's so much quicker and easier. It just makes so much sense.
The hardest thing of a fund, that's why I commend you, because it's not easy to raise money on a blind fund. It's actually much harder, I think, to raise money for a blind fund than a project-specific deal, because they don't know what you're buying. They're literally saying, first of all, I trust you as the fund. Rich, I know you and I trust you and I'm going to give you my money. And yeah, you give them parameters. I'm going to go buy hotels and this is the area, or I'm going to buy multifamily, whatever you're doing, you give them parameters, but they actually don't get to see the actual property. They don't get to see your assumptions. They don't get to see a pro forma. So it is, generally speaking, harder to raise a blind fund. But if you can pull it off, 100%. It's so much easier.
Yeah, I noticed. So the last one we did was December of last year, and that was the third one. I noticed that was quick, and then this one will be our fourth and our final. So those investors will kind of know exactly the three that we have, and then the fourth that we're
That's
buying.
right. Yep.
So to your point, maybe that will be the quickest one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's no additional documents, right? You don't have to do another PPM. You don't have to do another business plan. I mean, you know, we generally want to sort of let them know that, hey, these are the three assets that are already in the fund, obviously. But yeah, I mean, if you can pull it off, it's a great, you know, it's a great way to raise capital and not worry about always having to do a new set of docs or a new set of stuff. You just have a fund that's just always on.
How long can you keep a fund open for? Because I know for us, we kind of want to keep probably doing a new one every like 4 or 5 properties, just to kind of keep the properties on the same timeline in terms of refinancing and all that. But you know, if you want to just keep an open fund, I mean, is there any timeline that you got to like abide to?
We can call those evergreens. You could have an open-ended fund.
Evergreen.
And now the only challenge you have other challenges, right? So I mean, if it's open forever, then how do investors get out? You're gonna have to come up with some withdrawal mechanism or some system to get people out, and then how do you finance that? But no, I mean, I've got clients who have what we call an evergreen. It's always open, and we just have withdrawal like every year. There's a window, and if you want out, you put in a notice, and we figure out how to get you the money, and we got a bunch of time to get you the money. But you know, because obviously the last thing you want to do is have to liquidate properties to get people out.
Yeah.
But no, as long as we look at the end of the day, this is what's fun about syndication in general, especially for me. You can do whatever you want, honestly. Very, very few things you cannot do, right? Like paying people to raise money and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're disclosing, that's the name of the game. Disclosure. If you disclose, you can structure your deal however you want. You want to do a 1-year fund, a 100-year fund, just put it, as long as we're disclosing and the investors go in open-eyed, then do whatever you want.
Hey guys, real quick, the only way this show grows, the only way we continue to bring on bigger and better guests is if you guys rate, review, and share the show. So if you could take 2 seconds or the click of the thumb to review on Apple or Spotify, it will mean the world to me. But more importantly, we'll be able to reach more entrepreneurs and more real estate investors and help them build wealth through this podcast. Now back to the show. So I know some folks that are in the space, bigger names in the industry, such as Grant Cardone. He's got some sort of fund to where he can basically pull together investors that, you know, I believe non-accredited as well, and they could invest with as little as like a couple $1,000s. What is the name of that? And that's something that I might be interested in doing down the road. Yeah. What exactly is the name of that?
It's the same thing. So remember we talked about you have to either register, find an exemption, or it's illegal. He's doing an exemption called the Reg A, Regulation
Reg
A.
A,
So
okay.
instead of being a Reg D, which is what we do, 506B, 506C, there's one that's Reg A. And the nice thing about the Reg A is you get the best of both worlds. You get to advertise your deal, right? Just like you do in a 506C. And then you get to take non-accredited investors. There's no limitations on the number of non-accredited. There's some limitations to how much you can take, 10% of their income, 10% of their net worth, whatever is lowest. But yeah, you end up with a lot of little $2,000, $5,000, which some people think that's a nightmare, but that's what Grant does. He does a lot of Reg A offerings. The problem with the Reg A is twofold. Number one is that there's a mini registration process. So unlike Reg D, what we're doing, we don't have to file anything with the SEC. With a Reg A, you do. You do the exact same process we do. You get the PPM, you get all the documents, but before you send them to the investors, you got to send them to the SEC, and then you got to work with an attorney over there, and there's a lot of back and forth. So it usually takes 6 to 9 months to get it approved. So it doesn't work unless you're doing a fund. If you have a property under contract, you got to close in 2 months, 3 months. You don't have time for that. So that's the first thing. And then there's compliance. It's still a lot of compliance. Not as bad as a public company, but there are entry reports, exit reports, quarterly reports, audited financials. There's a bunch of compliance, which to me just means dollar signs because you can always outsource that. But I think the big one is it just takes, and I think Grant, I know the attorneys that set it up. So the first one that he did, they put him through the ringer a little bit because he's a big public figure. So I think his took a little bit longer than usual.
Yeah.
But now once you get him approved, then it just opens up your world because you can kind of get your cake and eat it too.
With those, how long does it typically take to set up the Reg A?
So the prep work on our end isn't any different. It'll take us 2 weeks to do all the paperwork. But then once you submit it, then think about it, you're dealing with the government, right? So you got to wait 30 days and they give you feedback, and then they're going to look at your website. They're going to look at your social media stuff. They're going to look at a lot of stuff. They'll give you feedback. So you got to, you revise the docs, you get it back to them. So there's a lot of back and forth with those lawyers. And so that's why that process takes about 6 months from the time you actually submit your application to the time they actually timestamp it and say you're good to go.
So one thing I really want to start soon, maybe later this year or maybe next year at the latest, but and I think I have a lot of investors that have an appetite for this, is I want to start a debt fund.
Yeah.
What exactly do I need to do to start a debt fund? And then which regulation does this fall under?
So the debt fund is going to be the exact same regulations. When we talk about regulations, we're talking about we're raising capital and then we're doing something with that capital, right? So the raising capital is always the same. It's register, find an exemption, or it's illegal. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to be like, do you want to advertise this debt fund? Do you want to do? And then the way there's a lot of ways to structure them. I like the way where we just create, it's actually technically, it's still an equity fund for investors. So we like to create an LLC. It's almost like a bank, a lending LLC, where all the investors come into that LLC. And then that LLC is the one that loans the money to wherever, the project are going. It's a lot easier to, like, for example, it's a lot easier to put a lien on if you're getting a secured loan, like if you're lending it to your own project, somebody else, you can put a lien on it. And it's just easier when you have one. Imagine you have 25 or 50 investors and they all want a lien position. Well, how is that going to work? The first guy's number one, second position, third position. So it's just easier to do it through an LLC, but that's how we usually structure them. We create basically our own bank. Investors become equity investors in there, and we just let them know we're raising money with the intent to loan money to this company or whatever at 10%, 8%, whatever the interest rate is. And then that's what they're gonna get paid, is at 10% or 12% or 8% or 50, whatever you're giving them.
And because it's debt and not securities, you're saying that you don't need to go through all the SEC stuff.
Yeah, because so the investors are still buying equity in the lending fund, and then the lending fund's doing because I presume that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the LLC is gonna then lend money to either one of your projects or for their project. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that way we always have money teed up ready to go.
Right.
The investors like the short-term money.
Yeah. But the investor is still just getting the security, which is your lending fund, shares in your lending fund. So it's the same exact thing. It's a 506B or 506C or Reg A or whatever you want to do.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've done a couple of these like for a specific project.
Yeah.
But not like a debt fund to where it's just ongoing. So I was thinking it'd be cool if, maybe your money's tied up for 12 months. After 12 months, then it's liquid, something like that. And then we would only probably do our own projects with it. Maybe at some point we'll pivot out and maybe lend on other projects. But I don't know. It's something I thought of. I think I got a big investor appetite for it. And it complements the fund very well because the fund is long-term money, 7 to 10 year time horizon. You're going to get some cash flow along the way, tax benefits, and then equity. But, for the folks that want quick money, they just want to park their money for 12 months, 18 months, and make a nice fixed monthly return. This complements the fund very well. And now you got two avenues for both types of investors.
And what's nice about the fund too is that what I always recommend clients is to put that on a monthly ACH, because now your investors are getting a month, because we know what the return is. It's going to be 10% or 12% or whatever the number is, right?
Yep.
So once you set up the ACH, it's good. And now they're getting a monthly check, mailbox money. So when they get more money, there's an appetite for them. It's like, oh, I'm getting $800 a month. If I give them another $100,000, I'll get another $1,600. So I think monthly is better than quarterly when you're doing a fund like that, because there's no extra work. You just put on autopilot and you're getting.
So I know Bethany was a GP on the boutique hotel down there with investor girl Britt.
Yeah.
Down in Belize.
Love Britt.
Have you been down to the property yet?
I have not. I used to live in Belize, but I'm not down there. Yeah, I lived on the island for a couple years.
Yeah. Are you doing any investing in real estate on your own?
I do, but usually on the LP side.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
I love that.
Actually, I had a couple of investments in Belize on Ambergris
Really?
Key. Yeah.
What kind?
It's resort properties.
Okay.
Yeah, resort properties.
I got to go down there and check it out. I was actually in Miami. I did a podcast with investor girl Britt. We hung out for a weekend, hosted a meetup out there, but she was like adamant. She's like, hey, let's partner up and let's host like a boutique hotel mastermind weekend down in Belize at the property. So I told her I would be down.
Dude,
so
it's
maybe later this
year.
year.
I love Belize. I mean, obviously I got married in Belize. I've been going down there for 15 years, and I don't go as much anymore because I'm married and kids and everything. And then I live there. When you live somewhere, it's a little bit different. There's no jet skiing and fishing and lobster diving as much as when you're visiting for vacation. But I love the country. Belize is beautiful. I would highly recommend all of your listeners go.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of South America stuff lately, and but nothing in Central America.
You were in Argentina, right?
I was in Argentina over Christmas break.
It's my neck of the woods. I was born in Chile.
Really?
Yeah, I'm Chilean.
Oh, what city?
Santiago.
Yeah. I've never been there. I need to go.
Beautiful. Yeah. Definitely. I'm going next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Done Brazil. Done
Where in Brazil?
Colombia.
Where in Brazil?
Rio.
Ipanema.
Yeah. No, I haven't been there.
Well, Rio's
what part?
Copacabana.
Yeah. That's where I stayed.
Ipanema.
That's
Yeah,
where I
it's right next
stayed,
to. Yeah, we stayed there too.
Cool area. But my favorite is Medellin, Colombia.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I've been there like 3 times now. That's one of my favorite cities in the world.
Yeah. Do you know George Gammon? He's down there.
I do not.
Yeah, George is a big economy.
Really?
Yeah, he's been living down there for a while now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I've never done Central America though, so actually going to do a Costa Rica trip in March of this year. So excited to check it out and see what all the hype's about.
Dude,
Yeah.
Belize, and if you can get up to the island too, I mean, it's a small country, so you can easily hop on a puddle jumper and get to the islands and do this stuff. But where the hotel is down in Placentia, it's a beautiful area.
Yeah, love that. Well, Mauricio, I appreciate you coming on the show. How can listeners get in touch with you and your team if they want to learn more?
You can get a hold of me. I've got a YouTube channel. Just go to Mauricio Rauld. I put a lot of content out there. I got, I don't know, a couple hundred videos over there. And if you want to get a hold of me and the team, you can just go to askmauricio.com and you'll get connected with us.
He's Mauricio Rauld. I'm Rich Summers. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.